about myself, I grew up in Southern California, where my dad coached me my whole life, played at San Francisco State, graduated, went and played overseas for a few years. And within returning from playing overseas, within about 5 months, I had gotten into grad school, and my father was diagnosed with stage 4 lymphoma. And my program was 18 months. And when I graduated, I was ready to go become a coach and ready to apply and go anywhere the job took me. But my dad's condition had turned for the worse. And so staying local made more sense to me. So I swirled ice cream for a year, managed an ice cream shop. And it was a great opportunity to lead a team and recruit different talent and do all the coaching stuff that way. But unfortunately, a few months later, I lost my dad. He lost his fight to cancer, which is a little bit of what qualified me for this panel. And then I had an opportunity to coach again in the spring. And as the jobs opened, I applied everywhere and got lucky to find myself at Monterey. And have coached there at RU, and now I am here at St. Mary's, and have also dealt with the loss of a player's father in this experience as well. So I'm excited to be here tonight. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Coach Kalafatis, you're up.
Good evening, everybody. Sonja, I think we all wish that we could just go twirl some ice cream sometimes. My name is Linda Kalafatis. This is it's my 8th year at the College of Charleston. Before that, I spent 16 years at Ohio State, 3 years at the University of Akron, and 5 years at California University of Pennsylvania. So I've been in the coaching ranks quite a bit, so I've seen a lot. I think originally I was asked to be on this call because my loss was that after serving 16 years as the head coach at Ohio State, my contract wasn't renewed, and we had a call earlier in the summer, and we talked about kind of rebounding professionally, but ironically, we just had some horrible loss in our program, so I saw a lot of the questions that are coming, so I think I'm able to speak to that later on, and also, you know, I've had players in the past too that have lost. I think we went through a 4-year span at Ohio State where we had 3 different players lose parents. So I don't want to be an expert on this. I'm not an expert on this, but I certainly have some experience on it.
Thank you, Coach. Appreciate it. And there are a lot of things we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about losing a season to injury. We're going to talk about, you know, losing seasons to COVID. We're talking about professional loss, and of course, grief when it comes to death and dying as well. So there are a lot of things we'll cover, and most certainly appreciate your expertise in many ways. Let's move on. Next panelist, Peter McGahey, women's soccer coach at St. Leo. Peter, go ahead.
So I'm really glad that I didn't commit my first error of the evening and leave my mute button on. So I'm going to stay out of the error column as long as I can. And I promise that that is not my last softball joke of the evening. My name is Dr. Peter McGahey. I'm currently the head women's soccer coach at St. Leo University. I also am a visiting assistant professor at the University of Tennessee Martin, teaching in their health and human performance department. In previous renditions, I've been a coach at Central Michigan. I've been a coach at Minnesota State. I've been a coach at South Dakota State, all in women's soccer. So that means my family has packed new boxes and made lots of friends. They can add up a lot of states on their fingers. And similar to the other coaches, I have coached in a program that unfortunately we lost a player. And then I, for my doctoral dissertation, examined the question, what happens now, coaching and leading following a student athlete death. So I dug into the topic further, which again, I'm sure we're going to uncover some of those topics tonight. And again, I think it's a conversation. Somebody mentioned earlier that a topic that's quite challenging to talk about, but we probably need to talk about it more in advance because those of us that are in this are going to be faced with these types of difficult and tragic situations more than we would like. So I'm really looking forward to learning and growing with all of you this evening.
Thank you, Peter. Moving on, Coach Stanton, Shonda Stanton from Indiana. Go ahead.
Dr. McGahey, I am going to say you're a catcher. You seem like a field general, so I'm going to keep score tonight. Anytime you make an error, it's going to be E2. Okay, just so you know from the scorecard how that works. Thanks to the NFCA, I'm honored to be on with this panel. Like Linda mentioned, we're not the experts or the pros in grief or loss, but experience is a great teacher. And so I think we have things that we can share tonight that are going to help. And I'd really like you to kind of take pause and think of those moments where you've gotten that unexpected phone call or that unexpected conversation, good or bad, where it just kind of takes your breath away, and think about that moment. And when you think about that moment, you know, hopefully it was a good thing that came to mind. You know, maybe you got the job, coach, or you know what, it's not cancer, or the house sold. You know, there's so many great moments, I think, you know, in our life, but it's those unexpected, awful phone calls that are so breathtaking when you get them. And you feel that life is going to be forever changed. It's before the call and after the call. And so I think being on this panel tonight, I have an opportunity to share from I'll probably draw from 3 distinct experiences. One was most recently that many experienced, and that was the loss of a season in 2019. And that's going to be easy to talk about because it was a situation that kind of tragically ended, we thought, and now we have this victory lap with our seniors and their super seniors, and now it's about celebration. The second one that I'll draw from was in 2016. We had a young woman named Emily that was coming back. She had just graduated the year prior, was coming back to work our camp and coming to our banquet. And she was tragically killed that night coming over to our banquet. The third one that I'm going to draw from was death by suicide back in 2002. And so I remember that cold, wet night and that phone call. And, you know, maybe that's a conversation that I haven't talked about a lot. Maybe it's the shame, maybe it's the regrets, maybe it's the stigma. And so I'm excited to learn tonight from our panel of experts because I know how I've grown. And I know in times when we're broken, we can be a better broken. And so I don't have a playbook for you. I don't have a manual, but I have some experiences that I'll be able to draw from and that we can come alongside you. And so I'll put my number in the chat here. Don't ever hesitate to reach out because that's what it's about. What I learned going through these experiences were the power of community, the wisdom and many counsel. And so I'm honored to be a part of this network and I look forward to the conversation tonight. So thank you for having me on.
You're welcome, thank you. And rounding out our panelists, our industry expert, Dr. Meghana Suchak. Dr. Suchak, go ahead and introduce yourself and a little bit about what you're doing currently.
Sure. I'm so sorry. I keep straining to hear you because you keep cutting out. I want to make sure that you folks can hear me. I think my internet can be patchy sometimes as well. So my name is Meghana Suchak. I am from India, in case you miss my accent. I have a degree from India, another degree from Australia, and a third degree from here. I am an associate director at the U of L Counseling Center. I'm also the director of training. The reason why I really like talking about grief and loss are a couple of different reasons. When I was in India, I was working for a non-for-profit where I used to work with children who were going through cancer treatments, which then led my interest into chronic illnesses. And when I decided to do my PhD, I said, I just want to keep doing death and dying conversations. How do you go about doing it? Because again, India is very different from Australia, which was very different from anywhere that I was. Can you hear me? Sorry. Okay. India was very different from Australia, which was very different from here, basically. So I feel like I wanted to learn a lot more about grief and loss and how we talk about it. And then I discovered that nobody, when it comes to grief and loss, nobody is an expert, I swear. I wish I could tell you that after 6 years of studying, I feel like, wow, I totally get this, and I really don't. Everybody is their own expert, that's what I can say. And everybody gets to, you walk through grief. You don't just like move through it. You've got to process it and go back to it. And it's iterative. It keeps coming back on certain days and certain times of the month and certain times of the year. So it's iterative. That's what I can tell you from where I am. And then when I came and did my PhD, I was diagnosed with cancer. So I feel like I got a backhand view of what happens as a cancer patient, then as a cancer survivor. So I finished, this was smack bang in the middle of my PhD. So I took some time off and then I went straight through. So in some ways that made me a better therapist. I can definitely say that. Did that make me a better person? The judgment is still out on that. So we will see how tonight goes. Thank you very much for having me here. It's an honor and an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. We're going to roll with question number 1. I'm going to put these in the chat as well. Here we go. For anyone that's lost a player, coach, or teammate, protocol taking time off, canceling practices or games, or is it better to continue to hold the surrounding athletes with what feels like normalcy? Dr. Suchak, we're going to start with you. So if you lost me,
I lost you. I'm so sorry. I did lose you. You said that. Oh, I read the question now. For anyone that has lost a player. Well, the way I'm gonna answer this is it depends, which is the really bad way of answering, I know. But for some folks, people who are close to the person who died or people who've had a regular contact with people probably are much more affected than people who are more on the periphery. So it basically depends on what your players are telling you, how they want to deal with it. Some people really are instrumental grievers, which means that they want to, if you are a cancer survivor, I really wanted to do the whole stand up for cancer and raise money for cancer patients and things like that. Some people like doing those kinds of things. Other people cry a lot and they are emotional. So they tend to be much more engaged with their loss in a physical way, which means that they are able to show you what's going on with them. So it depends on what your players are telling you. You may want to talk to them and ask them what feels right for them. And different players will have different answers. So work with each person individually as they are moving forward, I would say. Does that make sense?
yes, thank you. Coach McGahey, you're up next.
I would support what Dr. Suchak has said. Is from my experience, it's a place of where it's going to really be dependent upon each individual, the culture that you're going to have in your program. Sometimes the circumstances themselves are going to dictate what it is. Practice may actually have to be the furthest thing from normal, and you may be trying to move back to a sense of getting back to practice. I think it's a place of where the individuality, how grief impacts individuals, I think is something that we'll keep coming back to tonight. I just think is what Dr. Suchak has said about how it's going to impact individuals. And I'm going to bring this point too, is how it's going to impact you or your coaching staff. Remember, those are people who are in the dugout too, when these types of things happen. And oftentimes we forget on that. We focus on the players, and we forget to put our coaches and staff into the group that's immediately impacted with that.
Thank you. Coach Stanton, your thoughts?
Yeah, so these are one of those deals where there's no right or wrong answer. And I'd say you're the leader of your team. You're the decision maker, so you make decisions. And, when I walked through both situations, I was much better prepared in 2016 than I was in 2002. In 2002, it was death by suicide on a Wednesday night. The gals had packed that night, and our young woman died about 9:15 that night. And we were due to depart Thursday morning to head down to Chattanooga to play in a tournament. Of course, we canceled that weekend, and we spent time together as a team. And that's a very different feeling, death by suicide, as death by a car accident. And they're both death, and they're both tremendous and traumatic grief and loss. And I would say in 2002, we relied pretty heavily on the experts. And as a coach, I asked questions, but I didn't say, hey, this is what I want to see happen. Flash forward to 2016, I said, this is what I need. And it was a lot of time where I would ask, I relied heavily on my staff. I was very fortunate when I walked through both tragedies that my senior woman administrator, my boss who hired me, walked through with me on both of those circumstances. And so I knew I had a partner that when I said, hey, this is what I need, that she was going to do all she could to make it happen. So in 2016, our young woman died on a Friday night. We were due to open up the very next weekend. And so we had 250 campers coming in on that next Saturday morning. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But we were like, what are we gonna do next week? We didn't know when the funeral was gonna be, the arrangements, those types of things. There was one ceremony at Rio Grande where she was a nursing student and the staff went over to that. We felt it was very important for the players to stay back, take care of themselves that week. And we made the decision to go to the viewing and the funeral. And we all hopped on a bus and we went to Jackson, Ohio. And we wanted to play that weekend as well. When we had talked to the team, you know what, we had a lot of administrators, our AD, hey, why do they want to play? What's the need to play? So we had 3 classes that all played with Emily, and we had a class that knew her but didn't play with her. So you had all those different emotions. And so we finally just said, hey, this is what we're going to do. We're going to go over, and for some people, young people, they've never experienced loss like that and death like that. And so we said, it's up to you. We're going to keep somebody, a staff member, if you need to, back at the hotel. If you don't want to go to the viewing or the funeral, you'll be taken care of. And so we gave them options, a smorgasbord of options within our trip. But the itinerary was, first and foremost, how are we going to honor this young woman and her family with taking care of the mental health of our current student athletes. That was our mission. And once we got clarity of mission, we were able to make better decisions as coaches and the leaders that I was surrounded with to be able to get great counsel. And I tell you, you can rely on people that you never realized you'd rely on. Margot Yonker, who is a tremendous legend in our game, competed against her quite a bit in the MAC. She just had sent me an email and said, Shonda, sorry you're going through this loss, but I know you can handle it. And so I emailed her back and said, hey, this is what we're thinking. Help, what do you think? And I tell you, her wisdom was tremendous. That morning when I was still undecided, I got a text from my best friend, Julie, who I grew up with, and said, you are smart, you know what to do. And that's all she said. And so at the end of the day, you're the leader, you're the coach, sync counsel, plug into your power source, and make decisions for your team.
Thank you, Shonda. Linda, let's go to you.
You're gonna make me follow Shonda, the wise one. I was mistaken. Now, as I think back, it was 4 players in a span of 5 years at Ohio State, and they all happened very differently and at different times. We had one young lady. We were gonna play Michigan on national TV, and her mother died at 2 a.m. that night, and she wanted to go play and honor her mother. We had one that passed over the holiday break, and so her teammates weren't around. She lived in California. And so the coaching staff flew out and attended the funeral and brought her jersey to put in her father's coffin. We had one that happened during the year. She was redshirted though. And I knew before we were about to play in a game, and I saw her get the news in the parking lot and break down, and we had to go play. I had the trainer take her. We played that game, and then afterwards, I told the team, and they were obviously heartbroken. And then just recently on Sunday, we haven't been able to wear mascara in our program here lately. We had a player's parents and their grandmother and her grandmother die tragically in a car accident. So we're living it, we're learning. To me, what I told my team, and this COVID situation, we haven't even been all together yet as a team. We're trying to pull every resource we can, but I told my team at some point we are going to need to get back together. Softball is what brought us together. That's how we all know each other. It's what's going to help us get out of it. And when we do decide to get back together, if you only have 50% of your heart to give, then give that 50% and let it grow from there. But in this day and age, I think you've got to let the players help you as much as you are the leader, and they need your direction and leadership. they'll let you know what they can do too. And I think it's important I think we all are good at having those certain players that we communicate and connect with, but it's really important in these times too to find the ones that maybe you don't have that connection with, and that you're hitting all the bases, and that you're getting a good feel for your community and your team. And you work through it as best you can. You find a way to honor those people. We're going to find a way to honor this player. She's, she's 20 years old. She's got a 22-year-old sister and a 14-year-old sister, and they have no parents. She's never been through grief or death before. She's handling it better than I could. She's just a remarkable young lady. We did have a grief counselor talk to the team the very next day. The coaches went up to her house. Thankfully, she's rather local, so the coaches went up and spent that first evening with her. I went back up the next day, and there are some other details. Let's just say I'm in quarantine. She's in quarantine now. But I knew taking the risk that I needed to be there for her. But we got a grief counselor. They talked to the team. They made the team talk, really. If you've ever been with a counselor, they make you do the work. And it was eye-opening. This young lady's roommates are struggling. They were there. One of the roommates was there when the coroner came. She had to pack her stuff. She was there. And the hurt that those players are experiencing, and that our program is experiencing, and our coaches, it's deep. But I've never in my life heard the word "I love you" more than I have in the last couple of days. And, that's what'll get us through.
Thank you, Coach. Appreciate it.
I think we lost Joanna, so I'm going to jump in, Joanna, just for a minute. I think we lost you. So Coach Garnett, I don't think you've had a chance to answer this first question, so go ahead.
Thank you. And Linda, I think I speak for all of us when I say that we're so sorry for your loss. And I think as coaches, it's so hard to find your role and find your voice in those moments, because you're grieving as well. You are trying to relate to your player and figure out the best thing to do. And you're absolutely right when your players kind of know how to navigate that conversation. And they're so much braver, I think, than I was at that age. And I think the one thing I would really want to touch on is that I think canceling anything is the wrong direction to go. I think we need to just facilitate more things in those moments. Maybe we don't practice, maybe we don't condition, but get together, have a conversation, hear what your players are feeling, sit in silence for as long as you need to have your players communicate. I'm not an overly religious person, but we are at a religious school, so we had a priest come out and do a prayer with our team, and gave our player the option to have a mass in her father's name. And like those, I think that those small things, the more options you facilitate for your athletes are actually the best things that you can do. And again, just listen to the pulse of your athletes. They might take a day off, but that next day getting into normalcy of, even if it's just go out there and get your anger out with a bat or your frustration out. And if they don't show up, don't have them run the next day at 6 a.m. You allow them that time. And the one piece of advice that I got from our baseball coach at the time at St. Mary's was, he had a player who had lost his mom and to cancer, and he was having a really hard time with it. And the coaches said, if you feel up for it, show up. And if not, don't. Your journey is your own, but this family is always going to be here for you. And so we really tried to take that motto, and our player, she took 2 weeks off and never missed a day after that, just dug fully into softball and was amazing. But again, it's the strength of these athletes. It's amazing.
Well, thank you all for sharing. We're going to head to the second question. You see it in the chat there. And Dr. McGahey, we're going to start with you. But what should you consider when delivering the news of a loss to staff and students? Definitely not something that's, we have much practice with as coaches. So what's your best advice for that?
I think you've got to be real. I think you've got to acknowledge your emotions for yourself. I think you're going to feel a certain way and have a certain reaction. I think when I went through my tragedy, when we lost our student athlete, it was a place of where I felt like I just wanted to contact a lot of people and try to keep people in the know to make sure that they weren't surprised by the news, that people had, that I felt like I was able to connect and reach out to each of them individually to have a touch point. So it was really important, at least for me in our situation, was to reach out and communicate with people directly so that you could hear from them, that you could connect with them together, that you weren't going to miss anyone. The checklist and the yellow pad with all the scribbles and scratches were long, but that I felt like was really important. And I think it's a place where in this day and age, they probably know before you've reached them, and your communication to them is still meaningful and powerful for them.
Well, let's turn to the coaches. Coach Garnett, let's start with you.
Thank you. I think Peter hit on the head. They're probably going to find out. News travels so quickly now, and I do think that there is a little bit of a sense of urgency to deliver that news as a leader. So I think the first thing is, how can I quickly let our team know? And in this COVID era, that might be a Zoom, or it might be some way that you could get the most of them together and have some sort of an intimate experience. But I don't know if there's great advice on that delivering of the news is always hard, but I think you really want to listen as well in that moment once you've delivered the news.
Well, thank you for that. And Coach Stanton, as you shared earlier, you've been in this situation a few times. Any thoughts on delivering the news?
Yeah, there's again no right or wrong way, and we say a lot that clarity is kind, and so I think it's important to be really clear. In our situations, the death by suicide. I vividly remember I was out at a local restaurant celebrating a coach that was moving on to another job, and we had 2 young women on our team that found Dana, and so news spread really quickly amongst the team. Probably before I got the call, and she had died at one of our facilities. And so we all showed up there. And by the time I got there, the majority of the team was already there. And it was one of those situations where, everybody's just, you're in utter despair and just grief. I think one of the, when you look back, Dana was seeing counseling. And believe me, it is so important to have that counseling. But when you go through a horrific event like that, student athletes were young, and you want to blame, whether it's the counselors at that moment or your coach or a teammate. And we had an incredible group. I tell you, I'm so thankful for them. And I'm honored to be on this call tonight because I've been on this thread with 9 student athletes that were seniors when Dana died. And we've been on this thread for a while. I don't know how I got on it, but I just like to see the banter. And last night I just texted and I said, hey guys, tomorrow night I'm on a panel about grief and loss. Is there anything you'd like to share with me that I could share that either worked well or did not work well? And I tell you, I thought I just was going to come and share those things with you. And instead, a lot of those things are private moments that it's like after 20 years, they're things we didn't talk about. And so I'm thankful that I'm having this opportunity to have these conversations with those young women who are they're now in their 40s. And so that, we've been able to process some things. So we had a counselor there that night that was talking to them. And at that point in time, they didn't want counseling. They just wanted to be with each other. And so I think I learned in the second situation when it happened, when we learned about Emily, I went in the bathroom and I threw up, and I came out and I gathered my staff and I gathered, my boss was there. The grief counselor had already showed up. I looked at my boss looked at me. She knew what I was thinking. That was not the right person to have there at that moment. She talked to the grief counselor and said, we're going to need you, but right now the team needs to be together. And that was huge. Then we gathered our team together, and we all spent the night together. And when I look back at, one of our players, she texted and said, Coach, I just wish we would have spent the night at your house all weekend. And you know what? We didn't do that the first time. We had moments where we set aside time where, one meal each day of the first 72 hours that we got together, and that meal turned into an all-day experience. But at night, we wanted to give them their space in that time. And there's a difference between, being isolated or having solitude. And I think that's really important to understand the difference. We want to make sure that our kids have the opportunity to have that solitude, but at the same time, we didn't want anyone to feel isolated. And so the news in Cooper's situation, Emily, who died in the car accident, we had a player that first got the news that she was in the tragic accident, but she was being life flighted. And so we pulled the team together and said, what do you want to do? We have 200 people out there, friends, family, supporters. We can send them home, or we can go on with the banquet. We're not going to be able to come to Cooper's Aid right now. Her family's going to keep us posted. I had a conversation with the mom. The kids want to go on with the banquet. We wrapped up the banquet. I'm sitting there talking to a recruit, and all of a sudden I see somebody run and start crying. So I knew right then that she had died. And so then we gathered up our team. And again, we talked about what we were going to do next. And every step of the way, like Linda said and Sonja said, we said, what do you want to see happen? We want to take your input, and then we provide the structure. And then here we have 200 kids on campus the next day for a camp. What do we do? My assistants get on the call and start calling people. Jody at Ohio University, she brought her entire team and staff to work the camp. I called my friend up in Akron. She drove down with her GA or volunteer 5-6 hours. My assistant called Kentucky, where she played, and they sent over a GA and somebody. And so in your time of greatest need, man, just reach out to people and tell them what you need, and they're going to come alongside you. And so I think in delivering the news, the greatest thing that I learned then, when you flash forward to the easier situation, hey, your season's over, but I don't want to minimize that. Loss is loss. Whether you lose your puppy, divorce, we experience, just because you haven't experienced suicide or you haven't experienced maybe death of a player, man, the magnitude is still great. And so our job as a coach is not to judge what that feels like. And it's our job is just to provide the support and come alongside them, love, and lead them. And so when we lost our season, that's all we did, is we honored the pause and we were quiet. We delivered the news quickly, concisely, and then my staff and I got to work, and our players just cried and stayed together. And we had GAs that got them to dinner, and then my staff, we got to work about how can we honor them. And so I think it's important to be clear, so you're kind, and I think it's important to reach out to others. But I think what Dr. McGahey said, they're going to find out the news probably before you are. And so it's how do you then respond to the news that you get?
Well, thank you. And there's no question, you just showed right there the support and the connection of the softball community. It comes to the rescue in so many different ways, and certainly at a critical time. Dr. Suchak, how about you with this particular question? Love to hear your expertise before we move on to the next question.
Thank you, but I will tell you my thoughts on it. The first thing that I was thinking about is when you disclose news, I'm assuming all of you the coaches are the ones to disclose this news. I do want to own up to my lack of knowledge about softball. We don't play softball in India, so I am just going to own up to that one. So when you are the ones that are breaking this news, I think it has to come from you folks, but I've also noticed that like in my culture, if it's a suicide, we don't like talking about it that much. So it's better to, in that case, to touch base with the family to kind of know what can be revealed, what can be talked about, and then reveal it to your players. One thing that I think all of you have touched upon is getting them all together and just being together at that point. Usually when a death happens, I don't know how it is in your family, but in my family, there's a lot of awkward standing around. That's what usually happens. And then there's somebody who cries, and then there's somebody who will, share a memory. But there's a lot of pausing, and there's a lot of silences. And that's how it should look like. There is not like and then when you have a ritual that you folks touched upon, one of your, Sonja was the one who said that she's not very religious. I'm not very religious either. But rituals at these kinds of times really help. So whatever ritual you have, some folks want to honor their family members or honor the player, go right ahead. I think that those all make excellent, all of them have made excellent points out here. So that's where I am at.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much for that. So we're going to shift gears just a little bit, and in terms of loss, and we're going to start with you, Coach Kalafatis, but you've had some players, I am confident, throughout your very long and storied career who've lost a season to injuries. So how do you encourage athletes who have lost a season to injuries?
I think, like Shonda said, grief is grief. You know, when I lost my job, I was grieving. It was a tremendous loss. And these athletes losing a season, whether it be by COVID, whether it be by injury, whether it be by mental health issues, deaths in the family, it's still loss. And I think if the player is still with you and around you, and certainly you encourage that, that they stay included. You know, there are different thoughts on whether you keep them home and keep them in class or take them with you. And I think for me, it's always dependent on, you know, where they are in their development, in their years of service, I guess. Maybe an older kid who's been to, you know, these schools before, maybe it's better for her to stay and study, or maybe a kid that doesn't do as well, here's an advantage for her to have more time to stay and study. Or if it's a young player and they've never been on to some of these schools that you're going to, that experience, that they're still learning in the dugout, that you include them in the dugout, that you include them potentially in warm-ups, that you continue to ask their opinion. We all know it's amazing what you see and learn just by observing, that you ask them to keep charts, that you give input. We did have a player 2 years ago. We've got a player who's a third-year freshman. She was redshirted her freshman year. She's redshirted COVID year, and now she's back with us. But after, I want to say it was the first weekend. It was very, very early on, and so we decided to keep her, to travel with her unless rehab or doctor's appointments, you know, kind of took over in that case, or if she had school concerns. But it's amazing what they can learn sitting right next to you. So I think that's probably the best angle. Yeah, that I can give in that respect.
Oh, well, thank you for that. Coach Garnett, how about you?
Sure. So I think that encouraging them to have a purpose. So find what their purpose is, and also honoring their journey. So we all recognize that when COVID took away a season, I had 3 athletes that were well on their way to their careers or grad school, and nothing was going to stop them from pursuing that next step in their journey. And I had 2 players who couldn't wait to get back on the softball field. And those are their choices in those moments. And so I think when they take that injury, again, knowing what their journey, does this mean they're going to have another year with you? Does this mean that they should be strength training and doing what they can within their injury, and what their purpose is going to be on your team? Maybe their purpose, maybe they're not a high academic kid, so their purpose is to get their GPA up for you, for the team GPA, for your team goals. But I've had players who have taken a season off due to injury and come back and been so grateful to see it from that perspective. And it's made them a better athlete. And I think that it can be so valuable, but giving someone a purpose and helping them own that is crucial to keeping them engaged and encouraged along the way.
Well, thank you. And Dr. McGahey, you've been in a lot of schools, a lot of institutions, just a lot of athletes who probably have gone through season-ending injuries. How about your advice on that?
Helping them reframe what their mission is, what there is. I think this is a place where my perspective changed with adversity. After we lost our student athlete, after Josie passed away, how I connected, how I communicated with the athletes about what really is adversity and what really isn't adversity. And it sometimes is that their context of how they view it is their ACL is they have two. So it's the really most important one, and some of them have 3 and 4, but it's that their ACL is most important to them, and that's really important. And now that's their context. But some people in the world would give anything to be a part of the team, even going through the struggles that they are. So helping them reframe their adversity and putting it on the right adversity meter, I think helps them be more consistent, them stay a little bit steadier, and then again, as the other coaches have talked about, how they find their purpose within the team and how they stay engaged is improved after that reframe.
Well, thank you for that. We're gonna move on to the next question here in the chat. Just and Coach Stanton, we're going to start with you. Coaches in general, we don't sleep a lot of times. Sometimes it is evasive, but especially when we're going through periods of loss, I think anyone has sleep disruption. So just, do you have any tips or suggestion on helping student athletes or coaches sleep? When these things happen, as you mentioned, whether it's the loss of a parent or student athlete in a coach's case, or loss of a job, whatever it might be, just some tips on helping with sleep.
Yeah, I look forward to hearing what some of the experts say, but sleep is so important. We know how vital that is. And, if you want to sleep more, right? It sounds that simple, but it's not. And I think of when I had young kids and routine, how important routine was, a warm bath and putting the lotion on them, grabbing a bottle and reading a book. And they knew it was time to go to bed, and you kind of unwind. And so now you flash forward and you got these young adults, and you as a coach, you're dealing with all the stress and the loss and the grief, and your mind is racing, and it's hard to fall asleep. And, that's when you're alone, with your mind, right? And then you wake up the next morning, when you finally fall asleep and you don't feel refreshed, and it's the trauma smacks you again in the face, right? And so we understand how important, sleep is. And so I think routines are important. I think the ability to unplug is important. And then finding that ability to have some solitude, whether it's meditating, prayer, reading, whatever you can. There's so many great apps out there right now. The Calm app is something that is really great. But there are probably a plethora of those that you can tap into. And then see the experts, the people that can advise you. Keep a journal of your patterns of sleep and kind of what your thoughts. It's, keep a notepad by your bed. When we lost, Emily, there were so many things that I realized I hadn't dealt with when I had lost Dana. And I would wake up feeling that I was in the hotel middle of the night and that I was dying because I didn't take some pill. it was a recurring dream that I would have every night. And I went to the doctor, and they're like, man, you have high blood pressure. Let's get you on a pill. And I don't know, about that dream, but it was, I tell you, once I got on that blood pressure medication, I slept much better. And so sometimes you need to reach out to the experts. I was trying to take care of sleep. I'm trying to tell my student athletes how to sleep. At the end of the day, you got to do whatever it takes to get you to place. And for somebody, it's routine. Somebody, it's seeing an expert. Whatever you need, you got to reach out, because you got to have self-care first if you're going to have other care.
Well, thank you, Coach. Turning to Dr. Suchak, any words of wisdom on sleep during these situations?
Sure. So now, tell me, how old are your folks? Just give me a ballpark range of how old are your athletes usually. What's the age range?
18 to 22 is pretty standard.
Okay, so for 18 to 22, a good range of how much they should be sleeping is 6, 7, 8, 9. If they're sleeping any less than that, they're going to be extremely irritated. If they're sleeping any more than that, then they're going to feel extremely overwhelmed. So that's one on sleep. And they have to eat. I think they do pretty strenuous exercise. So they have to have, if possible, 2 to 3 meals. If they're snacking, that's all good. But remember that Snickers ad where there's this guy who gets really hangry, and then somebody gives him a Snickers and then he's fine. That actually does happen. That's a true phenomenon. So when we look at what's happening with this age group of young adults, We see that if they can maintain their sleep hygiene and if they can maintain their eating routine, then they are pretty good to go. So when I talk to folks, I usually say, do you remember when you're driving up a hill, you see those two white lines that you always follow when there's a lot of fog around and you can't see much, when they're those two white lines that you follow. So sleep and your eating are those two white lines. Anything changes out there, you're going to feel it and your mood is going to be affected by it. So most of you got it. There are apps, but what also happens is in this age group, they struggle with a phenomena called FOMO, fear of missing out. You only live once. So they're forever checking their social media a lot of times. So I usually tell my clients who are in this age group that please turn off your notifications on your phone, especially after like 7:38. Folks who follow that really helps them because it kind of gets them down. Otherwise, they're looking at their phones all the time. The other thing that I tell people who have sleep disturbances, I tell them to go and get a sleep mask, the thing, because when your body is kind of coming down, there's a hormone that gets released in your system that tells it, okay, go to sleep now. And then when light comes upon you, when the sun rises, again, another hormone gets released, and that tells your body, okay, it's time to wake up. So when you have a sleep mask that goes over your eyes, your body gets tricked into thinking that it's darker longer. That really has helped people get better sleep. So that is what I would suggest when it comes to getting good quality sleep. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you very much. Great advice there. Very much so. And Coach Kalafatis, same question, but shifting gears a little, different type of loss. You've talked before, as you mentioned, this summer and just in general about your transition at Ohio State. And so thinking back to that time in terms of sleep and or even right now, of course, which I'm sure sleep is a little bit elusive, but just some things that you're doing and that you did during that time at Ohio State that really helped you with some sleep.
I drank heavily. No, I'm kidding. I joke about that a lot, but I'm kidding. I was going to say my questions would be tell your players to put their phones down, and then, yeah, coaches drink. But, I think the inability to sleep is because of what we're thinking and feeling. And so that's your answer, is to try to find a way to calm or deal with those thoughts or feelings. I will say a great natural herb out there, ashwagandha, is a really, really good, it's helped me here lately to settle for those that are very anxious and energetic or wound up early. It's probably better to take that in the morning. I know a doctor that takes that in the morning. For me, because I don't sleep well, it helps me in the evening. I take it before bed. But I think honestly, Bruggs, I think it's being able to deal with those thoughts and feelings and being able to slow them down and understand what you need to do and where you need to put them. And a nice good bath right before bedtime is a good one too.
I mean, we're talking about being hangry, all about being hangry. We're talking about taking a bath before. I mean, you're speaking my language now, so this is great. But thank you all for that. I'm gonna have all of the panelists answer this next question. But Dr. Suchak, I'm gonna start with you. Is the process for grieving the same for all types of loss? Death, non-death, all of these types of loss we're talking about this evening?
No, that's the simple answer, but I'll tell you why. Because there's also, when it's a non-death loss, there is also an element of things continuing on with folks when you lose a relationship, or when you go through a divorce, or when you lose a job. Things are still moving forward for that other party. It's you that's affected. So in your body, it's going to feel the same way, but the process is, what we have noticed is that when it comes to death losses, it's kind of like you wake up in the morning and there's that sucky feeling that you have in your heart. That goes on for a long time. It doesn't get easier, it becomes smaller and more manageable. Say if you have a divorce though, that feeling you will still have a relationship with that person that you left behind. But at the same time, it kind of feels like you are able to forget it some days. So I would say that that's the difference out there. When it comes to a job loss, I would say there is an element of when you find another job, yes, you still grieve the things that you left behind, but again, you kind of start moving forward with things, and you're not going to remember anniversaries, or you're not going to remember that when my father died, he's not going to walk me down the aisle. Those kinds of events don't trigger you as much. So I would say that there is a qualitative difference to it, but the way your body reacts to it, it's pretty much the same.
Well, thank you for that. Coach Garnett, shifting gears over to you. How about you? Same question.
I mean, I'm not the expert in that by any means, but I would certainly say that I think even with death, the experience in the grieving process for who you lose can significantly be different, at least in my own experience. And obviously everyone's different, but losing my great grandmother was much different than losing my father, and much different than losing a player's father. So I would have to say that I think that the process of grieving can be different for any loss just based on that example. But I think just allowing, in our role too within this, just allowing people to have their own way that they go through grief. And I think we've all had a player who's just heartbroken after a breakup who comes to practice, and you're like, it's just your boyfriend in college. Like, who, you know what I mean? Like, I don't get it, but that is so real to them and so meaningful. And you know, if I put myself back in those shoes, it's the same thing. I can relate, but just giving them space to process whatever grief that they're experiencing too.
Well, thank you for that. And certainly you are absolutely right. That's why we have Dr. McGahey, Dr. Suchak on the call tonight. Coaches, we are not the expert, but certainly you have, as you mentioned there, Coach Garnett, experienced as a coach. We experience all types of loss, from loss of a game to loss of you know, the players' parents, whatever it might be in terms of death, the loss of a job. I mean, we could go on and on. So we've lived a lot of those experiences. So Coach Stanton, turning to you, same question.
I kind of pick up what Sonja was talking about, where, you know, it's just a loss of a boyfriend or whatever. Loss is loss again. And I was reading a book recently, Fear Gone Wild, and I think Dr. Suchak touched on this about how the pain is either intensified and then over time it kind of lessens. And think of it this way, I wrote this down so I wouldn't forget. But think of a box, and the box is your life. And inside this box is a ball, and that is your grief. And then there's a pain button in there. And when life starts happening and you're rattling the box, that ball is going to roll around and it's going to hit that pain button. And over time, that ball may start to get a little bit smaller, right? And there's going to be times where it's still going to hit that pain button. And it may be the intensity when it hits may just be as magnified. But as I look through the years, right, and when we first lost Dana, man, every time I saw number 5, she wore the jersey number 5. You know, we'd be out on a ball field and I'd see a jersey number 5 in the lineup, and oh, it just shoots through the air, right? You know, and you find yourself in a daze. I think of our players who, when we tried to get back to practice, and I just learned, you know, last night that a player was like, gosh, I hated softball. I was playing because my teammate died. I was playing her position. I never knew she felt that way. And so there she was, that ball over time now, though, for them, the ball has gotten smaller, but it still hits that grief, that pain button, right? And so, you know, I'm thankful for that analogy because I think that's so true over time. It's not that time heals all wounds. It's over time you do things and you learn tools and you rely on other people to process things better. And I think that's huge. You know, and I think, you know, when you look at grief, sometimes it can be so overwhelming. You know, I think there's this great quote from C.S. Lewis that it's like the sky, it's so expansive. And it's not our place to judge kind of how somebody is feeling about their pain. I think we can all rationalize sitting there with the Dean of Student Affairs and hearing him call home to Dana's parents. I could sit there and say that is the all-time worst pain. But you know what? When I sat and listened to our players, when I told them the season is over and they cried and they wailed, it was the same pain and loss that I heard when I walked into the room finally that night to see 20 young women standing before me and crying and leaning into each other's arms when they knew we lost Dana. or when we went into the back of the banquet hall and Emily was gone, right? And so we can rationalize as coaches and say, well, we're going to rank it, but it's not about that. It's about the ball of pain is in that box of life. And over time, I'm here to tell you, it will get better. We may be broken, but we're going to be better broken because of our experiences, because of the people who walk through it in our lives, and because of the opportunities to be able to share. So, I'll stop there, but I do appreciate, this time to be able to talk about grief and loss, because it's something we don't talk a lot about. And I think as coaches, we just want to power through and we're on to the next, right? But so many people right now are going through so many things. And so again, I will put my phone number in there. Man, if you're going through any type of loss right now, whatever it is, man, reach out. You're not alone. And I think that's so critical for us all to know. I just appreciate this panel and everybody that's here tonight.
Well, and we appreciate you. Thank you for sharing your insight and your experiences. And Dr. McGahey, we're going to turn to you and just your expertise on the process of grieving and the differences.
Let me share a story. So it's one of the coaches that I interviewed for my dissertation who had lost a student athlete relayed a story that I was thinking of when Coach Shonda was speaking, that the person had never spoken about their grief and their loss, about their team and how they had led through it. He said, he told me the story. He said, well, Peter, I've only talked about this with two people, my wife and my therapist. So I really appreciate just the opportunity to share with this, to try to process, to try to find other people who have gone through these types of grieving process. One of the things that I would say is that recognizing that everybody's going to process grief and loss differently. The analogy that I like to use is like, sometimes it's like an earthquake, right? So we see the earthquake analogy where it's the earthquake and it just radiates out from the epicenter. The thing that I think that what I would say through the experience and through interviewing other coaches is that we assume it's linear within our team. The people who are closest to the player have it a certain way. The players have it a certain way. I would say that in the course of study and in my experience, it's not always that way, that everybody's going to experience the grief and loss a little differently, their own way, in their own process, on their own time. And recognizing that some of the players who were closest to, Josie passed away tragically in a car accident that also involved two other of our student athletes, with one of the other ones in ICU as well. She recovered thankfully, and Josie unfortunately passed. But so it began with three and went and processed in that way. So it's one of the things I think that some of the players who were really close to her were incredibly impacted. And then there were some people who I would have never known they were so impacted by that loss from something else that triggered something else, that I think that was really important. And I think then the second piece, as it relates to the process of grieving, I also talked to the coaches about like how long it lasts. Like, and again, I love the box and the pain button analogy. Some of them said that they thought about it every day for 2 years. Some of them have told me that they still think about it daily, weekly. It's the number 5. Something triggers it. It's a memory that is there that they process. And so it's not only you as the coach processing and grieving and your players processing grieving, it's your program as a whole. So I think it was several of the other coaches have mentioned the idea about some of the players played with the player and some of them did not, because the games return, the seasons move on, we play more games, things happen. So some people are in the circle where they have a direct connection to the person who passed away or the grief experience, and some of them who don't. Like, I think it's even like, again, I would be curious to see the coaches who, your freshmen who have come in, didn't theoretically lose a season to COVID, but your existing rosters did. So how they all have that grief experience as a program, they deal with that. From a standpoint of death, the coaches that I interviewed said some of the programs were impacted on a regular basis for somewhere between 6 and 7 years. Which is, when you start talking about that, that's a while.
Yes, well, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And to wrap this question up, when you don't coach at 4 different schools and all the different types of players that you've impacted, Coach Kalafatis, and just, from a personal standpoint, just talk about the different processes involved with different types of loss and grieving.
Yeah, I was going to say, when I was called in at Ohio State and they told me they weren't renewing me, that feeling was anger. It wasn't sadness right away. It was anger. I told them, I said, oh, I thought you were calling me in to congratulate me on my 800th win, because, they had never said anything about that. But I was angry, and, the loss I feel now for these players is complete and utter sadness. That player called me to tell me, and to hear the absolute pain and agony in her voice is heartbreaking. And to go to that house and sit next to a grandfather who just lost his daughter, and then young girls that just lost there's the puppy, that just lost their parents and their grandmother, 2 totally different losses, but all the same, they're losses. I had a grandmother in Greece that I met 4 times, saw 4 times. She spoke Greek, I speak English. We never had a conversation, even though we talked at each other sometimes. But when she died, it was a loss. It was my grandmother. So I think, depending on the depths of those relationships, how long you stay in those stages, I think that's all dependent. A couple of the people talked about, and what's really hitting me now too is the triggers, and how loss now triggers pain in other people. So we've got a set of twins that lost their father 12 years ago. And this loss now, not only do they grieve for their teammate, but they're grieving for themselves again. That doesn't go away. That emptiness doesn't go away. We've got others that have had just recent losses that, when somebody close to them experiences loss, it triggers that all back up again. So, I think you learn and you grow, and experience is a wonderful thing. And I don't know that we always have the right answers, but certainly experience helps lead us. And I think communicating is the best way. If I would have told this team, okay, let's go, we're going to practice, or if you start that process too early, you'll lose them. You'll lose that respect. So I think it's a delicate subject. I think you've got to include them, and you've got to kind of have that feel for where and how you need to move on.
Well, thank you for that. And heading to the next question, it's in the chat, and Dr. Suchak, we're going to start with you. But anyone who's listening live right now, if you have a resource or a tip, or something that has helped you through a time period of grief and loss, please put it in the chat, share it with everyone. But Dr. Suchak, no one can prepare you to deliver bad news, such as the loss of a loved one, to a player or a colleague. But are there suggestions, resources, or tips to help? And again, if anyone has those, just drop them in the chat and share.
I think the bad news is that there is no right way of doing this, which is, I know that's not what you are looking for, but it's more about who delivers the news. We have research, lots of research on who delivers the news. If it is coming from somebody who is close to you, like the coaches to a players, then it's going to be received well. If it's like some person from the HR coming in and they are delivering the news, that usually doesn't go down very well. So I would suggest you coaches probably need to deliver things. The other thing, as I said before, getting in touch with the family as to how much should be revealed. My rule of thumb is that you talk about what happened. You talk about, you let people kind of marinate in it, and then you open it up to, okay, I can give you as much detail as you want, or I can hold back the details till you till you kind of get your head wrapped around it. That's fine. And then you open it up to how people are feeling. That's how I would do it. But that's the research does show us that that is the best way of doing it. But really, there is no, that would be nice to have a playbook on it, but really there is no playbook, unfortunately.
That would be a wonderful playbook for sure, but so many unique circumstances surrounding grief and loss. Coach Garnett, how about you? Delivering the news, or any resources that have helped you along the way through your personal journey?
Not necessarily resources. I think being vulnerable in those moments is really important. If you are sad, that's okay as a leader to show your team that you're sad. Every time I've delivered bad news, whether it was COVID or the loss of the player's dad, I'm always regretful afterwards, right? What could I have done better? And so I would love to hear from the rest of the panel too. The one thing that I do want to touch on is that I think that our players too, they really want to know how to help in those moments. So if their teammate is going through a loss, they want to know how to help their teammate. And they struggle a lot with not only dealing with their own grief, but how can they help their best friend? How can they help their roommate? And that weighs on them a lot. And so getting those athletes the resources and the conversations that they need to process not only the grief, but their role in that grief too. I think that that's important in this process.
Dr. McGahey, any tips, resources you have you'd like to share?
Tips, I would say the research that we did bears out Coach Garnett's comment about being real and vulnerable with your team, showing them real emotion. If you're a crier, if you cry, if you're going to handle it in a different way, you have to be real and be authentic. One of the things about the news that I would also build on what Dr. Suchak has said is that we as coaches sometimes have to recognize that we're going to deliver that news to more than just our team. So I think that there's a place of where how you communicate to your team. There's lots of good-natured and intentioned administrators. And Coach Stanton, I am envious that you had that you would use the term partner to support you through that time, like envy, like in the most, like, wow, that was great. And I had a tremendous partner, and I also had some folks that really wanted to speak when they didn't need to be speaking. So that's really important to recognize how you manage that message. And I think it's a place of recognize that in your role as coaches, if we're in the intercollegiate environment, in a high school environment, you may be put in a position where you're going to have to speak to the media about the situation, about the circumstances. And I think Dr. Suchak has mentioned this a couple of times about speaking with the family about how they want their son or daughter, how they want the circumstances spoken about. That preparation before you speak with the media is absolutely really important. Because again, there was a story from my study where the coach's player, unfortunately, was she was shot in front of her teammates. And the story that he shared was that he was not prepared to go out into the interview to listen to what the questions were because he just wasn't ready to communicate on that level. So really the tip I would have is making sure that you're communicating with the family about what details they want to communicate into the public sphere, and make sure that you're prepared for that. The media's job is different than the parents or the consoling. And sometimes as coaches, we have to wear our leadership hats and our leadership privileges in the most difficult moments.
Coach Stanton, you've had to deliver this news many times, unfortunately, but just any extra tips or strategies, resources that you'd like to share, things that helped you?
Now think about it. There's, don't quote me on this, but there's over 170,000 words in the English language. And there is nothing in that moment that you're going to say that is going to relieve that pain in that moment. And I think Dr. Suchak is right. If it can come from you, I look back on that situation on the night Dana died, and, we're going through it, and I can vividly remember everything about that first 24 hours. from there, there's a lot of, as I'm going through the text of those 9 players over those last 24 hours, there's a lot of information that it's like, wow, gosh, I didn't remember that. And that's good to hear. But the dean of student affairs, we went up to my office. He said, it's time to go up to the office. We need to call our mom and dad. We went up there and he delivered the news on the phone, and I was there to get on the phone next. But it was very, it was very, I guess, business-like is the worst word that I can think of right now. And I think in that moment when it is death, you think of a cop coming to your door, or you think somebody, they just deliver the news. And so I think it's more so afterwards, what is there going to be? What are the follow-up conversations? And what is the messaging after? When we look at grief and counseling, we learned from the first time, it was too soon that night. We needed to be just together with our closest circle. We flash forward in 2016, and it took us about a week, 4 or 5 days before we brought in a grief counselor. And it was somebody, he was the football team chaplain. And so he was very beloved and revered. And he was able to come in and really speak to our team about the messaging and the stages of grief. And then, Sonja talked about being vulnerable. And so in that situation, as a coach, I could say, hey, this is where I am in the stage of grief. We want to hear from you. And so take some time and journal and tell us what stage of grief are you in, and what can we do for you, and what are your needs? Because I think we've all seen it. Everybody processes it differently. And for some, it's going to be the entire season. Some 6 or 7 years, like you mentioned, some 20 years later. The wounds are still really there and really fresh, but you know what? The triggers are different. When they think of Dana, instead of going to that place of the dark and the rabbit hole they shared with me, they go to the beautiful smile that she had, the determination and grit with which she played. And so I feel that same thing when I look from Dana's time to Emily's time. When I see the number 12, man, I light up, and that's a moment for me at noon or 12:12 that I can send a text to a family member and say, hey, I love you, I'm thinking of you. And we don't need to say anything else. That's it. It's just, I see you. I don't know what you're going through, but I see your pain, and I want you to know that I love you. And I think that's enough sometimes, those words, I love you.
Thank you for that. Appreciate that. And, we're going to go, this is a topic that it's not an easy one. Not that we expect it to be, but it can be very heavy and just taxing on our hearts and our heads. And I just really appreciate all the panelists sharing their expertise. And Brad, thank you for dropping that in the chat about heading back to the ball field. Just a great story there to share. I invite you all to read that. And thank you for sharing, Brad. Now we're going to go to one more time around to all the panelists, just some final remarks, final thoughts. We're talking about grief and loss, and just some wonderful tips, strategies, stories that have been shared this evening. So we're going to start with you, Coach Kalafatis, just some final remarks this evening.
Well, the other panelists have been so good at hitting so many different parts of all of this, and I've certainly taken my notes. I'm not sure what can prepare you for loss, whatever type it is. I think back to some of my kids that have experienced that, and I was talking about the player at Ohio State who played the day that her mother died, and we got killed by Michigan on national TV. And a lot of people get killed by Michigan. Brugge, you can probably experience that a little bit too, but I think I've cried 2 times on a ball field, and when we won the Big Ten title, because not too many teams do. And when Coach Hutch grabbed that player at the line and just embraced her from the other side, because she had lost her mother not too long ago, and she knew that pain. And we're in COVID now. We're in a team shutdown. We can't even be all together. I couldn't bring my team together to tell them in person. They haven't gotten to hug their teammate. We did a drive-by. We had a candlelight vigil planned, but we had to cut that short, but we did a drive-by with the team. We dropped some stuff off. We saw her from a distance, but don't stop thinking about ways that you can touch them, and know that her pain won't be gone for, Peter, what did you say, 7 to 8 years? But there will be others on the team that will experience that pain and live that pain. So I think just continuing to keep in touch. For us, it had to be the written word, group me, Zooms. We've done quite a few of those lately. Our grief counselor was over Zoom, a little awkward, but we needed to do it. My first conversation with the team was on the way back with my assistant coaches from the house on a cell phone that doesn't even have video, just to all speak. So like Shonda said, I think if you can reach out to people that have been through it, or that haven't, I think we are a bigger family than we all know.
Well, thank you for sharing. We know this is just so raw and so real for you right now. And just thank you for taking the time to share your experiences tonight. And you're helping not only the people on the panel tonight, but this will be available to everyone tomorrow. So thank you very much. Dr. McGahey.
Linda, I just want to say, I admire your strength and courage, Coach, more than you know. I've never met you. If I could offer you a virtual hug, I certainly would. Having walked in similar shoes, never your shoes, I could not imagine the courage and strength and the willingness to share with others sitting and sharing what you're sharing tonight. So I would not want to have missed my admiration for your courage and strength, and appreciate you sharing that tonight. I'm going to take a little different tact with this. We focused a lot on sort of with the immediacy of this, but I'm going to try to offer a little bit of a couple of things, just some, because the games are going to move on. Like the grief and the loss is going to happen, and the intensity, and then things are going to continue to unfold. I just want to point out a couple of things that I think are really important. The other coaches have mentioned tonight, they've used this word honoring the player. I would really encourage you all to recognize that word honoring is really important as the games re-engage and as life continues to move on, and avoid playing this game for. The research that I had was really, really powerful in that respect, about the coaches realizing through trial and error that when they put the extra pressure of having to win this game for Susie or Johnny or those things, it put things totally out of whack for the athletes. So recognizing that you need to be really respectful of motivating for future games based on the tragedy and loss, particularly when it deals with death. That remembering and honoring is good, but winning for is quite difficult. I also want to say that everybody has said this: professional counseling is okay for your teams, for yourself, for others, to rely on the professional people who know more than us. It's really an important resource to recognize. And then the last piece, I think, is that I would close with two things. If you're faced with this set of circumstances, and I think the coaches who've done a tremendous job of this, put your focus on your players. Let your administrators and those things who support you do the support staff things. Let them pick the lunches, let them pick the menus, let them do those things, and focus on your players, because they need you, they need us, they need our leadership and guidance, and healing takes time. So again, thank you all very much.
Well, thank you for your expertise and for sharing with us tonight. Coach Garnett, just some final words.
Yes, and I just want to thank the NFCA again for having this very important conversation. As coaches, we think we know the X's and O's, so we're going to get out there and do our job. But those of us who are on this panel and on this call to educate ourselves, And everyone in the NFCA, in my experience, knows that their true north is really to develop these young ladies into strong women. And we do that by facilitating these really good conversations and supporting them through these times that they're all going to experience in their life. So I just think it's amazing that you guys are doing this. The other piece of advice I would strongly encourage everyone to do in this moment is like what Linda's going through is very raw and real. And I'm sure she has an outpouring of support by coaches and so does your player. But in 2 months, you don't want that player or you, Linda, to get forgotten that this tragedy has fallen on your program and has fallen on this athlete. She's going, when that ball, it gets a little bit smaller, but it keeps hitting that button. That's when that's when that support system is gone and that outreach isn't there all the time. And just that connection that player is able to have with you, Linda, is so important, and with us as coaches, and to continue that conversation. I texted my player tonight, and I text her like every other week, right? How are you? What's new in your life? What are you doing? And I just think it's so great to keep that connection. It doesn't always have to be about their loss, but make sure that they know that they have resources when they need them beyond that initial time, because that is very fleeting.
Well, thank you very much. How about Dr. Suchak, parting words?
Okay, I have three nuggets that I'd like to share. We didn't touch upon this, but I wanted to talk about there are no stages of grief. That research, Kubler-Ross did such a disservice to the whole field when she came up with those 5 stages of grief. There are no stages, and people start getting so caught up in that idea that I'm not moving from anger to acceptance. What's wrong with me? Let's not pathologize it. Everybody, it's kind of like when we think about it, it's like a wave. Out here, there are big picture items that are changing, which are like existential stuff, your meaning of life, your connection with your community, the way you are looking at yourself, your identity development. And on the other side, it's mowing the lawn, taking care of the bills, and you kind of move between them. That's how grief actually looks like. So that's one piece of advice. That's one. The second thing is, grief is about meaning making. What is the meaning that you're making of that event, and how is it affecting your identity? So if you can start asking your players to look at it from a lens of gains and loss, that will really help you, because then it balances it all out, because they are learning things about themselves the entire time that they are going through this experience, and it's making them be more resilient. So if we can talk about it from that perspective, that will really help. The third thing, the last thing, grief involves a lot of anger. There's a lot of anger that we don't really talk about. So that is what it is going to look like, which is why I went back to, there are no stages of grief. Nobody's stuck in something, but there are times where it will be that your players are pretty angry, and it might just come out of the blue, but that's where they are at, and we roll with it. So those are my 3 nuggets.
Well, thank you very much for sharing your expertise. And Coach Stanton, final thoughts here tonight?
I'm going to share one of the players that was on that thread, what she had sent as we were all kind of talking back and forth. And that's a quote, it says, "Forgive yourself for not knowing better at the time. Forgive yourself for giving away your power. Forgive yourself for past behaviors. Forgive yourself for the survival patterns and traits you picked up while enduring trauma. Forgive yourself for being who you needed to be." And so, I can sit here tonight, and when I look back, on the loss and everything in between, from death by suicide to a loss of a season, to a death in a tragic car accident, to, your loss of a pet or divorce or an injury, and we can fill in all the blanks. I think it all comes down to love and action. And what does that look like? Linda getting on the call tonight, going through what she's going through, she's a pro. That's love and action for her to take time and spend time with us tonight. It's about having those people in your life that you can count on, 1 or 2 people that you can just pick up the phone and say, this is what I need. And love and action, there's times where maybe the person going through that loss can't express what they need. And so it's, hey, on that thread, hey, KB, gosh, we just saw your parents got in that accident. I've got a meal coming to your house next week. And then the magic is that those people that you had a chance to coach, they leave such a greater imprint on your heart, because then all of a sudden you didn't have to tell them, hey, ladies, we need to do a meal train. They started doing love and action on their own. It was, hey, KB, you know what? You've got 4 kids and I've got diapers and some other things from Costco or Sam's Club coming to your house next week. I want to mix it up a little bit. Maybe you don't need a meal. So it's just, whatever, I call it the 10-second rule. And for me, it's kind of like the Holy Spirit speaking to me, but for you, it's just your gut maybe, or whatever it is. Act on it within 10 seconds. If you don't do it, it usually is gone. And so if you get that love and action little urge where it's like, I should send somebody a note, or it's 12:12, I should text Emily's mom or dad, or you know what, I'm going to send an edible arrangement to so-and-so, or a bottle of wine. Just do it. Love and action. I think if we can operate that way, we're going to help people go through their grief. We're going to better be able to come alongside of them. And so I encourage you to just understand, I think as a coach, what I've learned is that I'm not perfect. I've made a lot of mistakes, but I think there are those mistakes I've learned. And I think because of it, I'm a better coach, I'm a better mom, a better sister, just a better human being. And so I'm thankful for those experiences. Thank you to the NFCA and the rest of the panels. I enjoyed spending the evening with you.
Well, and thank you all for this super important topic, for your honest, real answers. I am confident you have helped not only the listeners, but as we share this forum truly with the world, starting tomorrow, I know you're going to impact so many more people. So thank you. I'm so impressed with your strength, and just so impressed with who you are as people. So thank you for sharing your expertise. Our next Educate to Elevate will be in November. We're going to shift gears a little bit, and it's going to be all about gratitude, which is also something very, very important to all of us. There you go. Attitude of gratitude, good vibes, and thankful thoughts in November, right before Thanksgiving. So thank you again for joining us for the Educate to Elevate. Thank you to the panelists, and have a wonderful evening, everyone.
Last thing, coach the player, not the game.
Thank you, Linda. Thanks, everybody.